So I'll just say good afternoon to everyone. My name is Jeanne Arnold, for anyone I don't know. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here and also chairing now the ADA Committee. So I first like to thank the ADA Committee members who are on Zoom right now for all their help with planning. This is our third annual, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm not right on that, third annual Disability Awareness Month program. And we're very fortunate today to have with us one of our own here, Adrian Cook from our communications and marketing, and he is the director of digital strategy, communications and marketing. And he's going to do a presentation for us today that the committee thought would be very timely since we're all in this virtual world right now. And his presentation is called Text, Accessibility, and You. So we're going to learn, I think, quite a few things about how to make what we do on the web and various scenarios accessible for everyone in the community. So very timely at any time, but particularly now that we're all in Zoom in our virtual world. So welcome, Adrian, and we thank you for taking the time to put this together for us. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeanne. It's my pleasure. I really am excited at the opportunity to talk about accessibility with everybody. And so let me just start off with some basic information about the format today. I have a lot to cover. I have slides and I have some demos that I'm going to show everybody. So what I would ask is that while I am doing the slideshow until we get to the Q&A portion, I would ask people to turn off their video. And that will mean that, you know, the slideshow makes more sense for everybody. Thank you. Secondly, please understand that this is being recorded. The intention is to publish this on YouTube publicly so that people can easily access it. The other thing to note is that the text of this, the speech, that the sound will be converted automatically to live captions using an automated service called auto-AI. Currently, you can get to those captions. If you see where it says live on auto-AI live notes in your Zoom window, there's a drop-down arrow, and you can use the drop-down to view the stream on auto.ai live notes. What that should do is bring up a window like this. Hopefully everybody can see my my browser window that shows the notes, that shows the text of what I'm saying being automatically transcribed, and hopefully without too many errors. Okay. So I'm going to switch over to my slides. All right. Okay. So let me just start my timer. Okay. So the purpose of today's, firstly, could people give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides right now, taking up the majority of the display?
Yes.
Great. Great. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So my intention today is to provide a presentation that is both informative about the sort of breadth of digital accessibility, as well as providing you with some practical tips and some information about how this can pertain to the work that we all do here at the college. The format is going to be, I'm going to discuss briefly what assistive technology is and how that relates to digital accessibility. Then I'm going to do a couple of demos, one for Captions. I'm going to cover some information about Captions and do a bit of a demo there. I'm also going to provide some demonstrations of reading some pages I've prepared for the purpose of this talk in a screen reader. And then I'm going to discuss some of the factors that underlie both of those experiences to give you a sense of the types of things that we are attempting to do at scale across the college website and web presence. that will have the effect of scaling that digital accessibility across the site to everybody. And then we'll end with some pointers about how to get more information and take any questions. All right, so the first thing I want to cover is the idea of assistive technology, which is also abbreviated as AT. So you'll see that throughout my slides today. Assistive technology is based on the idea that accessibility is for everyone. And the sort of famous within digital accessibility circles of the famous sort of story of how accessibility can be for everyone in actual fact is what is known as the curb cut effect. The idea of cutting ramps essentially into curbs was originally begun in the United States around the time that veterans began to return from the Second World War. And it's emerged as one of the things that we all take for granted in our daily life, and we all benefit from. If you've ever been pushing or pulling something on wheels, you would certainly know this firsthand. So the idea is that, this is true across a lot of things that pertain to accessibility. So just because the things that we talk about today might be necessary for people with certain disabilities to actually be able to fully participate, the addition of accessibility features is generally helpful for everyone. You may have even, just a quick point on that last slide, you may have even noticed that that's true with things like watching YouTube or television with captions on and the sound off, for example. Another important framing piece for this is that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which we refer to in training and I may refer to in conversations with campus partners, is a set of guidelines that we are required to meet in order to remain in compliance with the accessibility expectations that are placed on us and that regulate us, because not to put too fine a point on it, but accessibility is the law. In the past year, I've had a good opportunity to learn about this because we were investigated by the US Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. This was actually the reopening of an existing investigation, but in any case, it was successfully concluded. But it's the type of thing that can happen at any time. And since the website is constantly changing, we definitely need to make sure that we are keeping it accessible as we develop the site and as we add content to it. So this gets back to my question of what is assistive technology. And for anyone who's seen the movie Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, I thought this might be a good analogy because what assistive technology does is it essentially sits on top of technology that we're already using. So in this analogy, the technology we're using is the web page, the content we're viewing in the web browser. That would be Ripley, Sigourney Weaver's character, represented by the person inside of the suit here. And the assistive technology is the power loader, the suit that makes her more powerful than she otherwise would be, because it is using the existing technology, the browser in this case, assistive technology, to add additional functionality. Some of the types of assistive technology that exist, it covers quite a wide range. So I just want to give you a quick survey. Magnification is probably one of the most common forms of assistive technology, and probably so common that we don't even necessarily think of it as assistive technology. But I'm certainly finding as I'm getting older and my eyes aren't quite what they used to be, that magnifying content is often necessary. And so magnification is a typical example. For people for whom colors might not be as easy to discern as they are for a lot of people, then there's a various range of color tools that are available, from things like creating a color inversion, which is what you see in the two examples here. The first image has been inverted using a setting in Mac OS to invert the colors in the display. Other kinds of color tools that are possibly more common would be tools that enhance contrast. So nothing quite as dramatic as in this example, but Mac OS and Windows have tools that will increase the threshold of contrast between foreground and background colors. This is also something that is quite important for color on web pages as well. Another form of assistive technology, which we'll come back to, is the screen reader. The screen reader converts text into speech. So we'll come back to an example of that. This is a screenshot from the VoiceOver utility in Mac OS. And then captions, which describe audio as text. An interesting thing about captions that might not be obvious is that captions are they describe what is happening in the scene, not simply the script or not simply the spoken content. You might be familiar with this when it comes to seeing captions that introduce music or that describe sounds, or even captions that describe when audio is intentionally not present, if that wouldn't be obvious. So to summarize, assistive technology is software that modifies the behavior of other software. And critically, its ability to do that is dependent on the quality of the information that we put into the underlying software. So now we're going to look at a few examples of where the idea of text and text provided in a particular way can help to turn something that would otherwise not be accessible into an accessible experience. As I mentioned at the outset of this meeting and showed in a brief screen share, Zoom captioning is something that I'm currently using for this talk, though the captions themselves are not appearing directly in Zoom. Zoom has the ability to allow an integration such that the captions would appear in Zoom. I tested a few tools and I went back and forth with Eric in IT, who's responsible for administering our Zoom account. And there are some limitations or issues with the way that certain technology would be integrated into our college account. And so for that reason, the tool that I'm using today as a demonstration is appearing in a separate window. I'll come back to that window in a moment to show you and to show the people who've joined us since we started. But the main point here is that it is possible to have Zoom captions appear in the Zoom window. But probably the easiest way that you would be able to have that happen is if you assign a meeting participant to type captions live during your meeting sessions. So if that's possible, that's something that you can do right now. I'll also provide a screenshot in a moment to show how to turn that on, and I'm certainly available, and we'll be publishing notes on the website to give you a sense of how to do that. This is a screenshot of the situation that we currently have in our session today. This is based on a test that Jeanne and I were doing yesterday. This is how you might go about using Zoom in a situation where you were using the technology that I'm using today, which is a software called a service called auto-AI. So you would need to have the captions open in a separate window. auto-AI, the version I'm trialing right now, it doesn't come cheaply. It costs $30 per month per host. So I would pay $30 as a host per month to have the ability to do this. It does come with a bunch of other features, but just know that that is something to take into account. Interestingly, there may be a free option through Google if you're giving a Google slide presentation, which I literally just learned about 5 minutes before starting this presentation. So I haven't tested it and I'm not using it today. But if I learn more about that, I'll definitely add that to my notes as well on our website. To get going with captions in Zoom, you have to ensure that in the Zoom website, you log into your account and you need to make sure that the in-meeting advanced settings have closed captioning turned on, and you'll probably want save captions turned on as well, so that you can get a transcript of the captions that were shown live, integrated into Zoom during the session. The service I'm using today, because it's a separate web service, it actually saves the captions separately, just for what it's worth. And then in the Zoom player, there's also controls that you can use to do things like set the size of the captions once you've activated the feature. And here's another one that I also quite like, which is always show meeting controls. One of the things I don't particularly like personally in Zoom is how the controls disappear when you're not, when you're not hovering your mouse over the Zoom window. So in this case, you can just force them to always be on, and while that's an accessibility feature, I find that's really useful. Okay. Oh, I did say I would do another brief screen share, so I'm just going to do that quickly. Let's just see how that's going. All right. So hopefully what you can see is my browser window, and hopefully it's about to update with the words that I'm saying now. It's a little bit like watching Siri on an iPhone sort of gradually get things more correct or maybe less correct after it's heard you and processed the information. All right, back to the slides. So that was captions. That was the idea of being able to read something that you would normally listen to or watch. In this case, in the second example, I want to show you the idea of hearing something that you would normally watch or read. What I've done here, and I want to give you a little bit of background for the page that I've prepared here. I'm about to switch over to play this video, and the way I prepared this was I wanted to get some content for this test that was essentially real world content. So what I did is I looked at some content that was recently shared in the new Engage Gettysburg site. If you haven't checked it out, definitely give it a look, engage.gettysburg.edu. And this is a post that was created by a participant in Engage Gettysburg, by a user in Engage Gettysburg, advertising the existence of an upcoming event. And I just want to put in context that this event did have some reasonably good, very brief, but reasonably good summary of the information that was in the included flyer that was shared. So it isn't completely an inaccessible piece of web content in and of itself. So that's why I've entitled this slide a less accessible page, and this slide a more accessible page. And so what I'm going to do is show you both and demonstrate the difference between them. Okay.
Note, this page is for demonstrating screen reader accessibility problems. See Web Accessibility and Inclusive Design, link, for additional details. First name, last name's profile photo, link. First name, last name, link. Single right point and angle quotation mark. Gettysburg College, link. Campus Recreation, link. 20 hours ago, join the Financial Wellbeing Committee to get answers, tips, and advice for staying financially well during the COVID-19 pandemic. This will take place via Zoom on Friday, October 30th at noon. https://gettysburg.zoom.us/j/xxxxxxxx. Link. Pictures uploaded by first name, last name, link. Do great work, Stevens Hall.
Okay, so let me see if I can switch to, okay. So what you should be seeing now is the live version of this web page in my browser. And what I wanted to point out, firstly, I removed the information from this that identified the poster, because I'm not wanting to anyone to feel singled out here. That's why the Zoom link was XXXXX. However, you can imagine from hearing this, that what you would have heard instead of that is a random string of letters and numbers. And then when it came to the image itself, the screen reader voiced some information. It said that there was an image uploaded by a particular user, first name, last name. However, it didn't provide any information about what was in that image, which may leave a user wondering what they are missing. In other cases, and it certainly happens, the user who posts the announcement might not include information, text information at all. So in this case, the key information was included in the post. As I said, it's not a completely inaccessible page. But if there was critical information in a flyer and that information is not encoded into the web page as HTML text, then it would probably not be available to the user unless it was also jammed into a metadata element called alt text inside of the image. And generally when people are posting images and not posting text, they're also not thinking of alt text. So often the two things go side by side. Okay, and now I'm going to share another version. Okay, so in this version that I'm about to play, there's a few key differences. So I'll play it through and then I'll discuss what they are.
Note, this page is for demonstrating screen reader accessibility problems. See web accessibility and inclusive design. Link for additional details. Coronavirus and your financial health. First name, last name's profile photo. Link. First name, last name. Link. Single right pointing angle quotation mark. Gettysburg College. Link. Campus recreation. Link. 20 hours ago. Join the Financial Wellbeing Committee to get answers, tips, and advice for staying financially well during the COVID-19 pandemic. This will take place via Zoom on Friday, October 30th at noon. Join Zoom meeting. Link. Event details. We're all concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on the health and well-being of our family and friends. At times like these, we also need to consider our personal finances, career, and/or education. Date, Friday, October 30th, 2020. Time, 12:00 to 12:45 p.m. Stream. Join Zoom meeting. Link. Event flyer figure. Flyer showing event details in iGrad smartphone app. Link. Event flyer. Do great work. Stevens Hall.
Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to the live web page so I can scroll around on it. Okay, so this is in the accessible version that you just heard announced by the screen reader. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say this, but the reason why I'm doing recordings of the screen reader is because I find that switching between all these applications is hard enough. And assistive technology, such as a screen reader, can sometimes get confused, and sometimes all of the elements that I can see don't show in the Zoom. So that's why I did them as a recording rather than actually having my screen reader read this page to you right now. So what's different about this one? The first thing is that I added a heading to this page because there wasn't actually, in the post where I found it on the site, there wasn't actually a heading for the event. And so I added a heading because in the context of this page, it makes sense to announce what this content is that the user is about to hear. And as we'll see in a little bit, headings are a key feature of ways that you can make your content accessible to someone using assistive technology. So I added a heading level 2. So we have a heading level 1 already on the page. That's this one here. I added a heading level 2 here. The next thing that you'll notice is that I actually converted the literal URL into link text. So it simply says join Zoom meeting, as you can see. The underlying URL is the same. But that means that what the screen reader will do is it will voice the words, as you heard, join Zoom meeting, rather than reading out an entire URL. Now, it didn't take especially long for the screen reader to announce the previous URL, but you could probably imagine that if you're sharing something like a Google Docs link or just in general, having the words describe the link is what we should be doing. And that is definitely something that automated testing tools will pick up on. So it's always good practice to, instead of using literal URLs in your digital content, to use actual words and let the link do the job of getting people to the page. There might be some exceptions to that here and there, especially if you're promoting like a domain name or showing something at the end of like a YouTube video, or showing a very short URL. But generally speaking, it's a good idea to do this with links. Oh, and the other reason actually is that a thing that assistive technology can do is bring up a menu of all of the links on a page. So if that menu ends up being simply a list of URLs, it's very difficult to use. So that's a key reason why this is important. The next thing you'll notice is that I added what's called a heading level 3 to this, which is further subdividing the content on the page so that there is a section called event details. Then in that section, I included information that was in the flyer so that it isn't relegated to the flyer. So the idea is I'm trying to invert the relationship between the flyer and the text. So instead of the text being the text that's available to the screen reader, instead of that text being a sort of poor or minimal reflection, poor substitute or minimal reflection of the information in the flyer, I want it to be the main event and have the flyer be supplemental. It's not that the flyer can't exist, but if there's a lot of text in it, that text needs to be available to people on the page. And generally speaking, if we are asked to place in my team, if we are asked to place by campus partners a large amount of text in images on the site, we will often ask in return that we convert that to literal text, to HTML, and try to separate out the image from the text. So for example, a postcard or something that is like a postcard that you might share on, say, Instagram, wouldn't be appropriate for us to share on the college website. What we would want to do is take that background image and present it separately, and then present literal text as the text in the image and remove it from the image. In this case, because it's a print flyer, I just allowed the whole thing to be here, but made sure that it was possible to get to that information without it. It might seem peculiar that I allow this information to exist twice. A thing that if you've worked with me for any length of time, especially when it comes to issues like search engine optimization, my mantra is generally don't duplicate content. But in this case, I think it's important because what we're doing is ensuring that if a user was using a screen reader and invoked the menu to bring up the headings and navigate by headings, they might go directly to event details and skip this paragraph here. And so if they did that, it would be useful for all of the information to appear in one place. The other reason is simply that it probably aids readability. If someone's in a hurry, regardless of whether they're using a screen reader or not, they might see event details and notice this little block of content here and just sort of intuitively go there with their eyes. And so when the information is really important, it can pay to repeat it on the same web page. Okay. Let's go back to slides. Okay. I'm just checking in on time. Sorry, about halfway through. Okay, I think we're gonna do okay here. I do have one more demo to show you. Actually, two more demos to show you. The next one is PDFs, and so what I've done so far is I've given you a sense of a very brief introduction to what it's like to listen to a screen reader as it announces the content on a page. What I now want to do is show you three different kinds of PDFs in various states of accessibility. And I want you to get a sense that the takeaways I want to come from this is that it is true that PDFs can be made to be accessible. But I also would like you to be sort of aware that PDFs take longer to get to that state, generally speaking, than HTML does. In addition to that, remediating a PDF, it's like remediating the content on a single web page. If we fix a PDF that is not accessible, then that singular document is now accessible. But content in the website that is repeated can be changed at scale, can be changed programmatically. So there's a lot of reasons why minimizing the area that we're changing, as is the case with putting content on the website using the content management system, that sort of helps the accessibility effort to scale across the organization. The other reason is that, generally speaking, assistive technology does best when it's interacting with browsers. And that's especially true with modern browsers. They tend to have a harder time with PDFs, and PDFs tend to be less accessible by default. Okay, so with all that preamble, bear with me a moment while I bring up my examples. Okay, switching over. All right, so 3 examples. The first one is kind of based on the idea of a flyer that was created for an event. This is a common pattern that we have here at the college. This is intentionally without sound until I try to play it, which will happen in a second.
Warning, empty page.
So what happened in that first example is that I was opening it in the software Adobe Acrobat, running an accessibility check on it, showing that there was no content in the tags panel, and showing that further there's no content in the content panel. Then when I attempted to have the screen reader announce the content of the page, it let me know that there was nothing there for it to actually read. Okay, next example. I'm just going to pause it here for a moment to explain what's happening so far. So this is an example of a document that this is the accessibility level of this document while it was being created by our staff in communications and marketing. And because it was being created in a different application, a different generator than the previous one, it was created using Adobe InDesign, which is for creating layout for print pieces. Adobe InDesign included the text content in the output. So unlike the first example, you can actually see that even though it isn't tagged, and tagging is a requirement for accessibility, there is content in the content panel. And as in my demo, as I scroll this content panel, you can begin to see some of the content that exists. And what can happen is a screen reader can fall back from reading the tags to reading the content in the content panel. And that's what we're about to see.
Protect yourself and others. Cover your mouth and nose with a mask or cloth face covering around others. Face masks or face coverings must be worn by all employees working on campus when in the presence of others and in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain, e.g., common workspaces, meeting rooms, classrooms, etc. Clean and disinfect. Clean and disinfect frequently touched surfaces daily. This includes tables, doorknobs, light switches, handles, desks, computers, phones, and keyboards. Learn more at gettysburg.edu/coronavirus monitor.
The reason I let that play, obviously you could see where it was going once it got started and once it went to the next item. The reason I let it play through is I wanted you to understand how the screen reader was reading the content in the order it exists in the content panel. And in the content panel, the coronavirus URL appears to the screen reader immediately after the clean and disinfect panel. It also is worth pointing out that the clean and disinfect content was read immediately after the first piece of content on the site, well, after the heading. And that is not the typical order in which content would be, that people would expect it to, in the US, would expect it to engage with the content. Typically, we're looking for left to right first and then top to bottom. So that is something that is incorrect in the current version in terms of the practical effect of having the screen reader read the content panel. Okay, last example.
Protect yourself and others' face mask. Cover your mouth and nose with a mask or cloth face covering around others. Face masks or face coverings must be worn by all employees working on campus when in the presence of others and in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain, e.g., common workspaces, meeting rooms, classrooms, etc. Tissue box. Monitor your symptoms. Employees must conduct symptom monitoring every day before reporting to work. Anyone who is sick should remain at home and not report to work. Employees should not return to work until they have been fever-free for at least 24 hours without fever-reducing medication.
So in that final example, there's a couple of things to note. Firstly, the content was read from left to right first before going from top to bottom. The reason that that's the case is because over here on the left-hand side in the tags panel, that's the order in which the content is tagged. And what I did was it's definitely hard to see and it doesn't pass accessibility contrast standards for sure, but this is the outline that Acrobat provides around the content. I highlighted the specific figure group. It's like a figure and a caption, so that you could see that when the screen reader was reading H1, it was reading the content at the top of the document, protect yourself. When it was reading the second piece of content, it was, sorry, here we go. When it was reading the second figure, that was the one selected in the tags panel. And then finally, we got to this third item in this particular part of the tag tree. What is there to say about that and how does it pertain to you? I think the most important takeaway from this would be that PDFs come from a world in which the intention is to print color on paper. And while it's possible for a lot of the documents that we create and share internally to exist as digital documents, they were often created in order to print. And the idea there is that they would be a fixed size and width, and they would have layout, which is entirely appropriate to that medium. But the problem comes in when we are making that content accessible on the web, because if we simply put things that were intended for print onto the website without remediating them first, using the careful tag structure in this column here, then what we are doing is systematically disadvantaging people who depend on assistive technology. And that's not really a situation that we can get ourselves into in the same way in the print world. I mean, there are obviously accessibility issues with print, but when it comes, I guess the point is, when it comes to the web, if we're putting content on the web, we have an obligation to make it accessible. And to do that with a PDF often takes longer. The other thing I'll note about a PDF is that as document complexity increases, so does the time it takes to remediate all of these features, or in fact, to generate it as accessible in the first place. That is nowhere more true than when it comes to forms. one of the ways in which the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines ups the ante for forms is that it requires us to make them fillable and keyboard interactable. So that means that a user who is exposed to a form, who is presented with a form, they need to be able to use a screen reader to fill it out. And that means that if your form, even if it's perfectly passes all of the tag checks and everything, and you get all those beautiful green checkboxes in the accessibility checker, it won't pass the standard if it's a form and the form fields are not keyboard fillable. So if I can't tab through that form and fill my text into the fields, then it won't pass the standard. Because again, we would be systematically disadvantaging people who depend on that as the way to interact with the form. So that leaves us with a dilemma sometimes. What is the solution? It can be that we make the PDF fillable, and we do that in certain cases. Generally speaking, I would say, let's see if we can make it into a web form. It's going to generally be much easier for the end user to interact with that form, and it'll usually take a lot less time. All right. Just want to switch back to my slides now, see how we're doing for time. Okay. These slides, by the way, will be available to you after the fact, and so will all the links in them. If you would like to delve further into this question of what it's like to actually be blind and use a web, you depend on a screen reader, I did find a really good example, and I've put the screenshot in here with the captions on. At the point in this, this is a 1-hour presentation that involves a blind user using a screen reader on a live, like on a live Zoom meeting. And what they were doing is navigating 2 different websites using their screen reader. And one of the things you'll notice if you watch this video is that there are points where the user gets stuck, and it takes the user a while to recover from being stuck. And you can see the cursor moving around the screen, and you can see certain things happening, but that user doesn't have vision. So what we've been doing today is you've been able to see, for the most part, the people watching this who have vision would have been able to see that the screen reader was highlighting the areas of the page it was moving through. Obviously, a blind person doesn't get that aspect of it. So it's an important thing to think about, that blind people are people without any vision or who have severe vision impairments would be completely dependent on that text in order to move around. And this was the presenter's answer to the question: would you contact a company whose website you visited if it wasn't accessible? And when pressed, he eventually said, if it was a severe enough problem, I'd probably just do business elsewhere. So I think that's a really important thing to think about for constituencies that we are trying to engage, as well as just for the way that our users would interact with our content and maybe drop off and go elsewhere, but we would be underserving them, and if our content was inaccessible. Okay. The next part of my presentation is to introduce you to some of the ways that we can avoid these issues. So basically, the idea here is that the web was originally intended as a way to share documents, and documents in the sense that the web was invented to be marked up using hypertext markup language. The T part of that is text. The hyper part refers to linking, the linking of documents. And the markup part is what we're going to focus on here. That refers to the idea of structure or giving meaning to the content. And I was trying to think of a good metaphor for how to get across this idea. And I settled on this idea of a silverware drawer that didn't have dividers versus one that does. If you can imagine trying to find the right utensil, if you couldn't see, especially let's say you were trying to find a specific one, it might be very difficult to do that in an unstructured container, which is kind of what you would have if you just dumped all of the text from like a print document into like the alt text part of an image. It ends up being unstructured. The content is there, but it ends up being like a river of text that they have to work their way through. Whereas an organizer provides structure so that you can at least have a fighting chance of going directly to the thing that you're interested in. And in that sense, structure equals meaning. It's the idea of what is often referred to in front-end web development as adding semantics or adding the correct semantics to a page. It would be possible in a document to mark the conclusion part of, let's say, an article or a paper by calling it conclusion and separating it with vertical space above and below, and maybe bolding it or making it a different font size. But the really important thing to do is actually to mark it up as semantically a specific kind of content. And in this case, this green text, it's the conclusion to a piece of writing. So there's a big difference with what a screen reader can do with text that might be bolded or larger versus text that is wrapped in a semantic tag that gives it meaning. And this is where I wanted to show you the last example, because headings are so important. If you took two messages away from today when it comes to providing, to making screen readers have an easier time with our site, it would firstly be make sure that there is a text version, and that when there are images, those images are described with alt text. The next thing would be making sure that your document has headings. Okay, so here's the last example. Just prepare it now.
Headings menu. Screen reader test accessible. Coronavirus and your financial health. Coronavirus and your financial health. You are currently on a heading level 2. Headings menu. Screen reader. Corona event details. You are currently on a heading details. You are currently on a heading level 3.
So that was a quick example, but what I wanted to demonstrate there is that as I was using the screen reader, I was able to use my keyboard to invoke a headings menu. And then I was able to use my arrow keys to navigate that headings menu. And that was jumping me and jumping the screen reader and the text that it was announcing to that part of the page. And the longer the document is, the more important it is for users to be able to get around the page that way. And so adding headings and adding structure to the pages in this way, it's kind of like adding those dividers in the silverware drawer, and making it easy to go directly to the content in question. So those would be the real takeaways from today. Make sure that there's a text version of all of your content. Make sure it is marked up semantically so that it has meaning. And in particular, make sure that there are subheadings to organize the document so that people can find their way around. So this is the final part before we move to some questions. So just to attempt to sum up here, these are the things that I've just outlined. The one thing, and I probably earlier mentioned that we tend to prefer HTML, and that would be my advice to everyone as well. Basically, we want to make our content as accessible as possible. So the thing that you can do after 1, 2, and 3, being curious and understanding what this experience is like for people who use assistive technology, making sure that images have text, have alt text to describe them so that they can be announced using the screen reader, and then using heading structure. The next thing would be to prefer HTML over other document formats. So I already covered that general idea, but it is really important. If we receive a request from a campus partner to get something on the site and it comes to us as a PDF, a question that we'll often ask is, does this need to be a PDF? And we see that as the beginning of a conversation to really try and figure that out, because if it can be HTML, then it probably should be, unless there's a really compelling reason not to. And those definitely exist. And then the final idea would be to allow time and just to understand that for larger or more complex documents, or if the answer to the previous question is, yes, it does need to be a PDF, that definitely takes time to get right. We have a guide on our site and this is based on training that I have done in the past and will return to offering again, which is how to use Microsoft Word to create content using the idea of document structure. I have a video on this that you'll be able to access in the slides, but I'm not going to play it today. But you can get a sense of what that's like. And it's some of the things that I've gone through this afternoon. It is essentially possible to create content using Word, whether it becomes part of a PDF or whether it becomes stays as a Word document even, or whether it becomes web content. You can use Word as your drafting tool and make it appropriate for all of these things. It's just about how you use Word to do that. And it's about ensuring that you give it that semantics and not just change the look of text. Okay, and then finally, this is the place you can go to for everything that that my team has that we can publish for you to provide accessibility resources. There we are in the process of building it out still. We want to be able to add content that's appropriate for beginners, for content creators across the college, and also for developers and people whose interests or job responsibilities tend to the more technical side of things. We have things like browser plugins and examples of running through those plugins and how we would read that content. And I'll be adding some more videos. We do have some rather long-winded videos of me right now, but I'm going to be adding some shorter ones to give you a quicker way to get up and running on how to install a browser plugin and just see if the content that is on your area of the site is passing the test. Okay. Now we come to questions, and I want to just point out, just before I end the slideshow, I'm not sure if people are going to have questions, and I'm going to throw it open. We've only got a few minutes left. I have received questions in the past, and I do want to quickly address them. Often the type of question that I would get, and I don't want to preempt anyone if anyone already has this one, but I want to make sure I cover it. The question tends to be a form of, does it have to be accessible in these circumstances? Generally speaking, the answer to that question is yes. The legislation and the guidelines and the documentation and the way that it is implemented and regulated, it doesn't distinguish between public information, private, like information behind login, whether it's sent as an email attachment or actually on a public website. If it's the college, then we have an obligation to make it accessible. Okay, stopping my share there. And please feel free to turn on your video if you would like to. So I'll just finish that thought by saying we do have an obligation to make it accessible. I definitely understand that it isn't always possible to make everything completely accessible. And so sometimes we have to figure out where users are going and what is the most critical information and triage it from there. I know we're almost at time, but I'm certainly open to take any other questions that people may have.
let's thank Adrian for this really informative presentation. There's so much to be cognizant of, and it's so good to know we have resources there in him and CNM and in these tools that you've got already on the web, guides. And so we really appreciate you being our speaker today for our 3rd annual program, and probably have a minute if there's a question from the audience.
My pleasure.
Anybody have any questions that haven't been addressed?
Adrian, I'll ask a question. You mentioned a couple of times about contrasts and colors. I mean, how are we to know if we're putting something up what's a good background color or not? I mean, how would we know what to do with that?
Thanks, Lorraine. That's a great question. We have a tool that we use called, there are many such tools, but this one is related to the same folks that create one of the plugins that we use. I'm going to pop it into the chat right now, but it's also available at the page of resources that I'm including here. Using that contrast checker, you can put in colors, or even at the very least select eyeball colors that might be close to the colors that you're using. And what it's going to do is generate a report for you that explains what the contrast ratio of the foreground text color to the background color is. This does get complex sometimes if the background is something like a photograph, which has multiple colors. It also changes whether or not it depends on the size of the text as well. So large text doesn't have to have as high a contrast ratio in order to pass than, say, body text. But basically, short answer to your question, there are tools available for this. Automated tools will try and tell you if they detect contrast errors. Otherwise, I'm happy to explain this, and this is probably a good topic for a future quick how-to video if you're working in Word or something like that as well. Word's accessibility checker will also try and point out low contrast.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Lorraine, and thanks again, Adrian. I think we are out of time. I'm sure people have to run, but you know where Adrian is. He's accessible as well, so you can reach him if you need to. So thank you again, Adrian. We really appreciate it. This is information we need, and it's great to use as a topic to highlight Disability Awareness Month. So thanks again.
Absolutely, Jeanne. Thanks for the opportunity. It's my pleasure, and thank you so much for everyone for participating.
Yeah, great turnout. Thanks everybody for coming. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks. Bye-bye.